Afghanistan is sitting on $1 trillion of minerals, lithium, copper, rare earth elements, the exact resources the entire world is desperately scrambling to secure right now. For decades, that wealth sat untouched underground because nobody could figure out how to get to it. No stable government, no infrastructure, no way in and no way out. Then China quietly solved all three problems at once. Not with diplomacy, not with military force, with a railway. And Washington did not see it coming. Not because the intelligence was missing, because nobody in America believed China would go where everyone else refused to. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how China built a corridor through 5 nations across the most strategically critical landlocked territory on Earth, why America's ability to isolate any country inside it is shrinking with every kilometer of track laid. And the one decision China made that nobody in Washington saw coming, and that is now impossible to reverse. Everyone covered the Iran railway story. 10,400 kilometers. The freight train that crossed 4 countries in 15 days instead of 40 by sea. The sanctions bypass that made Washington uncomfortable. That story was everywhere. But it stopped exactly where the real story begins. Because the China-Iran railway was never designed to be a single line between 2 countries. It was designed to be the spine of something 5 times larger. A corridor signed in December 2014, not 2024, not last year, over a decade ago. And it barely made the news. If you want to understand what is actually happening in the world before it hits the headlines, hit the like button and subscribe right now. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people. Now, let us get into it. And here is the part that reframes everything you are about to see. China was not just building a railway to Iran. It was using that railway to unlock a door nobody else on Earth was willing to open. What was behind that door changed the entire map of global power. The problem nobody solved for decades. Most people think landlocked means a minor inconvenience. No coast. You use your neighbor's ports. Life goes on. That is how it works in Europe. That is not how it works in Central Asia. Kyrgyzstan sits inside a ring of mountains so extreme that building a road through them is a multi-billion-dollar engineering project. Tajikistan is surrounded on all sides by terrain and borders that have been unstable, closed, or controlled by competing powers for most of its modern history. Afghanistan has been cut off from stable international trade for so long that its economy has essentially been frozen in place for 40 years. Think about what that actually means in practice. A Kyrgyz mining company sitting on copper deposits worth billions cannot access global markets without routing through countries that add cost, time, and political risk to every single shipment. A Tajik farmer trying to export goods to Europe faces transport costs so high that the product cannot compete on price before it even leaves the country. An Afghan businessman with access to lithium deposits, the same lithium that powers every electric vehicle being built right now, cannot connect to a single buyer without passing through infrastructure that either does not exist or that someone else controls. These countries have been economically frozen not because they lack resources. They have been frozen because they lack connection. That single word connection is what China is selling. And the price is an influence that compounds quietly for decades. America understood this dynamic for years. USAID, the World Bank, and Western development institutions ran programs across Central Asia for 2 decades after the Soviet collapse. They built schools, trained civil servants, and funded governance programs. What they did not build was railways. What they did not finance was the physical infrastructure that would have given these nations an economic exit. That gap between soft power spending and hard infrastructure investment is the crack China walked through. Quietly, patiently, without announcing what it was doing until the tracks were already laid. the part nobody reported, the deal the world refused to see. Here is the part that almost no coverage bothers to mention. And once you understand it, everything else about this corridor makes complete sense. When the United States withdrew from Afghanistan in August 2021, it left behind a government the entire Western world refused to recognize. No diplomatic relations, no development aid, no investment, no engagement of any kind. Washington, Brussels, London all made the same calculation. Do not legitimize the Taliban. Do not send money. Do not build anything. Freeze Afghanistan out and wait. China made a completely different calculation. In January 2023, a Chinese company signed the first major oil extraction deal with the Taliban government. Formally. Publicly. Without apology. In December 2023, China became the first country to formally appoint an ambassador to Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. Think about what that actually means. While the rest of the world was debating whether to even hold a phone call with Kabul, Beijing was signing contracts, sending diplomats, and laying the groundwork for mineral access to $1 trillion of untapped resources sitting under Afghan soil. It was not reckless. It was calculated. China looked at a country that every other major power had abandoned and saw something the others refused to see. The most resource-rich, strategically located, and completely available partner on Earth. Nobody else was bidding. China did not need to compete. It just needed to show up. And showing up meant building the infrastructure that would connect those resources to Chinese factories, which meant extending the railway, which meant the corridor. It is worth pausing here to really feel the weight of that. The Western world spent 20 years and $2 trillion in Afghanistan trying to build a government it could work with. It failed. It left. China spent nothing on that effort. It waited. And the moment the West walked out the door, China walked in through the window with a contract and a construction team. That is not luck. That is a 20-year strategy paying off in real time. What each nation brings, and the numbers that prove it. Every nation in this corridor brings something specific. And when you see what each one contributes alongside the numbers behind it, the project stops looking like infrastructure charity and starts looking like the most strategically assembled supply chain ever built. China is the engine. Financing, engineering, construction, political consistency. China's policy banks and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank have committed billions across the various sections. But China is not doing this out of generosity. China needs what is at the other end of these tracks. Kyrgyzstan is the mountain gateway. The China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan Railway is a 523-kilometer line cutting directly through the Tian Shan mountain range at elevations reaching over 3,000 meters, higher than most of the Alps. The tunnels required to bore through those peaks rank among the longest railway tunnels on the continent. Cost estimate for this single section alone, over $4 billion. To put that in perspective, the entire U.S. high-speed rail budget for California has spent over $12 billion and produced 0 kilometers of operating track after 15 years of planning and political argument. China is spending $4 billion to drill through Central Asian mountain ranges at alpine elevation and physically connect 3 landlocked nations that have never had a direct rail link in their entire history. Construction started in 2024. 2 decades of negotiations. Now it is moving. Kyrgyzstan gained something it has never had as an independent nation: a direct rail connection to global markets that does not run entirely through Russia or on China's terms alone. The West calls Kyrgyzstan a transit country of limited strategic value. China calls it the key that unlocks Central Asia. Tajikistan is the connective tissue. It borders Afghanistan to the south, China to the east, and both Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan to the north and west. Without Tajikistan, the corridor has a gap. With it, the network is continuous. China has been building Tajikistan's roads and rail links for over a decade. Deeply, consistently, quietly. Here is the number that tells the whole story. China has built more paved roads in Tajikistan in the last 10 years than Tajikistan's own government has built since independence. The West's total infrastructure investment in Tajikistan over the same period, a fraction of what China has committed. Not because Western institutions lacked the money, because they lacked the patience. The West sees Tajikistan as a fragile state needing governance support. China sees it as the missing link in a transcontinental supply chain. Afghanistan is the prize. $1 trillion underground. Lithium that the global electric vehicle industry is desperately competing for. The United States Geological Survey estimated Afghanistan's mineral wealth at nearly $1 trillion back in 2010. Western mining companies looked at that number, looked at the security situation, and walked away. China looked at the same number, waited for the security situation to stabilize under a government it was willing to recognize, and signed the contracts. Copper, iron ore, rare earth elements. All of it now accessible through the corridor. All of it now flowing toward Chinese factories rather than Western ones. The West spent $2 trillion trying to stabilize Afghanistan and left with nothing. China spent nothing on stabilization and is leaving with $1 trillion of minerals. And Iran is the exit. Without Iran, every landlocked nation in this chain is still landlocked. With Iran, they gain access to Persian Gulf ports, the Gulf of Oman, and the entire Indian Ocean trading system. Iran also sits beside the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of all global oil passes through that single narrow passage every single day. That location makes Iran not just a trade partner. It makes Iran a geographic key that no amount of external pressure can simply remove from the map. The West has spent decades trying to isolate Iran. China just made Iran the exit ramp for an entire continent. What America is actually watching. America's most powerful tool against countries it opposes is not its military. Most people know the military exists. Far fewer people think carefully about the other weapon. Sanctions cut countries off from dollar-clearing systems. Naval presence at chokepoints threatens the shipping lanes that move oil and goods. Financial pressure on banks and insurers makes normal international business impossible for sanctioned governments. These tools work because they target the bottlenecks, the ports, the shipping lanes, the financial infrastructure that international trade runs through. Remove access to those bottlenecks and an economy suffocates, regardless of how large it is, regardless of how much oil or lithium it sits on. The corridor dismantles that logic. Not dramatically, not overnight, systematically, permanently. If Iran can move oil east by rail rather than by tanker through the Gulf, the naval presence at Hormuz becomes less decisive. If Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan can export resources through a Chinese-controlled land route, exclusion from Western financial systems matters less. If Afghanistan's mineral wealth can reach Chinese factories by train rather than requiring Western investment and Western shipping infrastructure, the leverage that comes from controlling that infrastructure disappears. The U.S. State Department's assessment of Central Asian infrastructure in its 2024 strategic review specifically flagged China's corridor expansion as a long-term concern, not because of the railway itself, but because of the dependency structure it creates. When Kyrgyzstan builds its entire export economy around Chinese rail, when Tajikistan's road network is financed by Chinese banks, when Afghanistan's mineral sector is contracted to Chinese companies, the question of whose side these nations are on in any future confrontation answers itself. Without anyone being asked, without any alliance being formally signed, the infrastructure makes the decision. European companies operating in Central Asia are already facing this calculation on their desks right now. Do you route your logistics through Western-aligned systems and accept the cost and delay? Or do you route through Chinese infrastructure and accept the political alignment that comes with the maintenance contracts? There is no neutral answer, and it is not fringe companies or small operators being forced into this choice. Germany's Deutsche Bahn, Europe's largest railway operator, is already in active discussions about connecting its network to Chinese rail infrastructure through Central Asia. France's Total Energies has simultaneous operations in both Western-aligned energy markets and Chinese-linked Central Asian projects. These are not ideological actors making symbolic decisions. These are the backbone companies of Western industrial infrastructure being forced to answer a question nobody in Brussels or Washington prepared them for. And here is the part that should keep Western strategists awake at night. This corridor does not need to replace ocean shipping to matter. It just needs to exist. It just needs to give every nation inside it an alternative. Because the moment an alternative exists, a threat of isolation loses most of its force. You cannot pressure someone by closing a door they are no longer using. Washington understands exactly what that means. It is paying very close attention. But attention is not the same as a solution. What comes next, and why it is already too late to stop? The preliminary agreement for this corridor was signed in 2014. That is over a decade of quiet, patient, consistent construction. The Kaf-Heret section is running. The China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan agreement is signed. Construction has started. Senior officials from 6 nations met in Tehran in May 2025 specifically to accelerate the expansion. The momentum is real. It is not slowing down. And it is not reversing, but here is what the current coverage is still missing. The corridor does not end at Iran. China has already completed preliminary surveys for an extension beyond Iran into Turkey, connecting this overland network to European rail systems for the first time. Those surveys were completed in late 2024. If that link is fully built, a freight container can travel from a factory in Chengdu to a warehouse in Hamburg entirely overland. Through 6 countries, without touching a single Western-controlled port, ocean route, or financial clearing system. That is not a projection. The surveyors have already gone home. The maps are already drawn. The feasibility reports are already filed. What remains is the construction. And if the pattern of this corridor holds, a decade of quiet preparation followed by rapid execution, that construction will begin before most Western analysts finish writing their assessments of what is already happening. The Iran Railway was the proof of concept. The 5-nation corridor is the architecture. The Turkey extension is the endgame. And by the time Washington finishes debating how to respond to the railway that already exists, China will already be 3 steps into the one that connects Central Asia to Europe permanently. This is not the end of the story. It is the beginning. China is already working on the extension that makes this corridor truly intercontinental. And the window to shape how that story ends is closing faster than anyone in the West is willing to admit publicly. If this video gave you a genuinely new way of looking at what is being quietly assembled across Central Asia right now, hit the like button and subscribe so you never miss what we cover next. Turn on notifications, because these stories move fast, and you do not want to be the last to know. Now here is the question I want you to think about and answer in the comments. If this 5-nation corridor is completed and extended into Europe, do you believe America still has the tools to economically isolate any country inside it? Or has China already built an alternative system that makes traditional sanctions permanently less effective? Drop your answer below. I read every single comment, and I genuinely want to know what you think.